This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so this is an introduction to Java, programming in Java.
Yep.
So as we can see from the first image, this is how a Java application is structured. So we have a class. So every Java application, we work with classes, and then we're going to have a main class. So in our main class, then we're going to assign a name to our file. So in this case is my program, and we give in the extension .java. So it's understandable to the computer, to the software that we are programming in Java programming language.
Yeah.
Also a quick reminder, if you could please unmute yourself. So I'll be asking questions during the tutorial. So,
Okay.
I'm having the problem. 1 second. Okay, so the name of the compile file will be myprogram.class. So as you can see from here, now we have a couple of data that have been inserted into our program. And what we're going to look first of all is what are data types. So for data types, we need to understand that these are the type of data that are going to be sent. The most used are integer, Boolean, chart, and doubles. So depending on the range of value that we might be required to use for our to compile our program, then we have to look into what was the most suitable. So if we work with numbers, we will look into using integers, and definitely we're not going to use characters, where characters can just read letters while integers can read numbers. And also we're not going to use Boolean, where Boolean is mainly used to check on statements if these are true or false. So as example, from here we can see that we have two integers. We have y and x. So we have initial value of y, which is 2, and then we have an additional value for x, which is 20. And now we have to calculate the final y. So from here, we do have to understand that this is possible because we're working with variables. So the numbers that are stored into this x and y are variables. That means they can change during the time, depending on how we're going to execute them. And then there's other functions which are called constant. So when we work with constant, we know once we declare value, it stays the same and it cannot change along with the time or with commands. So now, if we look into what's going to be our new output of y is going to look from 2 is going to become 22. So now we're going to look into Adrian. So now we're going to look into control structures. So what do we mean by do we mean by control structures? We are going to look into statements. So there are various numbers of control functions. So we have selection ones, where in Java there are 3 forms of selection that we can use. The first one is if statement, which allows us to make one single choice. Then we have if-else statements, which allows us to do two actions. And then we have switches, which allows us to do multiple choices. So from this example, we have our variable, our integer declared as x. Then we declare a scanner. So with a scanner, we are allowed to enter input into our keyboard. Then we have system out print, which we give a string, which is enter a number. And now we have declared our scanner with our x. And now we're using our first statement, which allows to make. We are using our second statement, if else, which allows us to have two output. So we're going to look if x is greater than 20, then we can now print yellow. Else is going to print red. So depending on the number we're going to input, we're going to have a different output. So we do have also an example for switches, where once we have declared everything, then we look into work with our switch. Our switch will have multiple choice, and each of them have to be assigned with case. So in this example, we're going to look at the time lab. So the example says to enter your group. So if your group is starting with A, your lab tutorial will be at 10 a.m. While if you're in group B, your tutorial will be 1 p.m. and group C will be at 11 a.m. So switches are used mainly when we have multiple options. Now we're going to look more at iterations. So iterations are simply repetition of statements, and they mainly code loop in the Java programming language. So there are three types of loops in Java. So we have for loop, which is a fixed repetition. Then we have while loop, which is a 0 or more repetition. And then we have a do while loop, which is 1 or more repetitions. So if we're going to look into each single of them, we have a for loop where we have our condition, our initial condition, where we're going to execute 3 times a code. So what we do in our loop, in our statement, we declare that our variable starts at 1, then our variable has to be less or equal 3, and if these two conditions are met, we can now increment until it reaches to 3 and it stops. So while in this case, our loop is going to execute 5 times. So the reason why it's going to execute 5 times is that our variable is not going to increment of 1. So from these slides, we can see that I is plus plus. When we see plus plus, it means that it increments of 1. That could be a shortcut of saying 1 plus 1. So we can simply use E plus plus. While in this case, we have E plus 5. No, sorry, E plus 2, which means we're going to execute this command 5 times. So our output are going to be 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10, because we are split up to. So with the while loop, which has a different function. For a while loop, we have a status where we have to go look into if our mark are less than 0, or so this logic gate, so the two barres in the middle is a logic gate, which this stands for or, means one of the two statements has to be true for us to execute. So while mark is less than 0 or mark is greater than 100, that's when we can now run our method where we have invalid mark, please re-enter. So by inserting our value, if we insert something that is greater or equal to 14, we're going to have an output of congratulations, you've passed. Else is going to say, I'm sorry, but you failed. So the way it works, this statement just going to check if your result is within the range given, then it's going to give you congratulations, you pass. And if it's not within this range, then it's going to fail. With a do while loop, it is a different case where we give some functions. So our parentheses start with a do, where we're going to execute a couple of functions. So for example, here is going to calculate a price, where we have a calculation of the price, and it has to be plus tax divided by 100. That's how we get the total value of the price. So this statement starts with a do, where you execute this command, and then once it has been executed, the user has wants another go, so we are allowed to run another command until we give a statement which is going to break our loop. Otherwise, the loop is going to continue executing. So after introducing type of statement and iteration, type of selection and iteration, we have to go into look into what are methods. So as we can see, for our program to work, we have to assign them some methods. So these methods are simple actions that our software has to execute. So for example, if we have a car, we can have attributes of car, which could be wheels, steering wheel, seats, and stuff like that. And the only way to move a car is by, for example, accelerating or using the brake. So in programming language, methods are considered as executing some commands. So for our car, in order to move, we have to tell him to move, to accelerate and move forward. So that's the same as programming. So that's where we work with methods. So from this first image example, we have method 1, which we are asking him to print them in a certain order. So due to the fact that programming language follows a sequential order, our output is going to be the last command given. So we can see that we have method 2, which is going to be the first output. Then from our main method, we are calling into this. So as we can see, we have a main method. So main method is the one that's going to execute the command, while other methods outside our main has to be coded in from our main method. So if it's not being coded from our main method, these commands are not going to be executed. This is another example with method two, and we can see how these commands have been executed. So now we're going to look into more complex data structure, where we have arrays. Arrays are simply the creation of for example, there are like some cells where we're going to store our data. So before we saw look into variables and constant, but another method of storing data is arrays, where they do have similarity. Well, so to create these arrays, we then have to give some statement where we have to give an initial point of access. So our first box has to be equal to 0, and then it has to increment until we don't stop our array. So to stop our array, we have to declare a length for our array. So this is an image of how you can see how this array are structured. So our initial array, this is a double, for example. So double can contain even not natural numbers. So we can have numbers like fraction numbers like 11.5. And since they're not natural numbers, we cannot use integers. We have to look into that. So our array, we have a first item, which has to be declared at 0, and then we're going to have a last item at the end. So due to the fact that computer programming, the first number is 0 and not 1, this means that in our array, our number 1 is going to be, our number 0 is going to be position 1. So once we say we have an array of 6, an array of 6 means that you have 7 elements inside the array, because our initial number is always set at 0.
Okay.
So this is an example of how array works. So as I mentioned, we have to set a length for it. So our array, we could there are different ways to declare arrays. We could fix them, give fixed array, like for the example of sum array, where we have fixed number 2, 5, 1, 9, 11, or we could use statements such as if statement, where we can increment the number, or we can choose when to break the loop, where we can stop the loop. So from this example, then we can see what's going to be the output. So the length of the array is 5 numbers, and then we declare to display the length of these 3 elements. And also we assign the value of the 23 to the last element. So we do, there's other type of loops, which are enhanced loops. So for enhanced loops, these loops execute condition with some specific commands. So for this example, the enhanced loop for loop cannot be used if you want to change element in the array. So this is a special way of using loop. So it's really enhanced, and it has to be used just for breaking the loop in certain times. Now we're going to look more into how objects are used for programming. So these are called object-oriented programming. As I made the example of the car might have its own attributes such as wheels, color, steering wheel design, and then you need method to work. So this move the car, for example, is a method. So if we going to look into this example of a oblong, which is a type of rectangle. So our type of rectangle is going to have the length and the height, which are going to be our attributes, as I made the example for the car. And then we have a constructor. So with a constructor, allows us to insert some parameters for our attributes. It allows us to declare our attributes. So once we have created our constructor, this method allows us to read the length of attributes. So for example, by reading the length of this attribute, it's just going to return us a value. For example, it's going to return 10, which is the number that we declare as length of our oblong. And then it allows us to read even the height the same way we read the length. So there's many other, this method also is going to allow us to write the length of our attributes. So by using public void set length, we are going to set a value for our oblong. And then with public void set height, we're going to set a height for our oblong. And then with public double calculate array, this method returns the area of the array of our oblong. So by declaring this attribute, we're just going to retrieve the value that we've been given for our oblong. And then we public double calculate perimeter, which will return the perimeter of our oblong. So to create an oblong object, as we can see from this example, we can now create our class as my oblong, where we're going to declare our new oblong with these values of 17.5 and 20. And then we are going to print the area of our oblong simply by using that method, which was calculate area. And by simply using that method, we are going to have an output of 350. And this is an example of set length. So by using set length, we can now change the initial length, which from 17.5, we can change it to 12.5. So now we're going to look how arrays of objects. So as I said, there are different ways for us to initiate arrays. So the first one is an example where we're going to declare that our array has a length of 3 integers, then an array of 3 bank account objects. So we can declare our array in another way, where we're going to call a bank account, and it's going to have length of 3. So we have 0, 1, and 2. This is how we're going to have 3 bank accounts, assuming that our first number is 0. And then this is how accessing object in the arrays. So the initial part is returns the bank account object, and the second part, the extension, it calls the bank account method. So by using dot deposit, we're going to call that value which has been stored into our account list 0. So we do need to understand what are inheritance. So by inheritance, we're going to have a superclass, which in our case is going to be employee, and some attributes and method of our employee can be called from can be inherited from our subclasses, which are full-time employee and part-time employee. So, for example, they might have income attributes in common. So, subclasses full-time employee and part-time employee inherit the attributes and method of superclass employee. So, full-time employee is a kind of employee, or part-time employee is a kind of employee because they inherited the methods. So, top line of each class, as you can see, we have public. So by public, we say that everyone can access our class and retrieve this method. And we know that the name of our class is employee, and the other two public class full-time employee extends employee, such as part-time employee. And this employee could be declared as an abstract to prevent us creating employee object. So for us on saving without repeating the same command, we can now use abstraction, which allows us to avoid repeating the same stuff over and over. So by just declaring public abstract class employee, we can now hide this functionality. Overriding is an interface. So the way we can now hide this, we can now use abstraction, is by introducing interfaces. So with overriding method, it is possible to redefine the method of a superclass in a subclass. This is called method of overriding. So as I can say, this interface just you put the code, copy and paste, you paste the code there, and you can now code this code from different from our main class through our interface. Also, we have wrapper class. So by wrapper class is simply collection classes such as array list that you will come across that cannot be used to hold simple type such as integer and characters. So to get around this, we will need a wrapper class. So due to the fact that we will be able to access a couple of functionality, that's when we call a wrapper class, which we basically, as the name says, it wraps all the functions into one class, and then now we can finally call them into our main class. So as I mentioned before, we need to understand what are object class. So in Java, every single class that is created is in fact delivered from what we might call a special superclass. So this superclass is called object. So for every object in the Java, it is in fact a kind of object and any code written to handle this object of type object can be used with an object of any type. So as I mentioned before, when we're creating, as we saw from this image, so I was talking about private and public, which I'll give you a bit of understanding, but now I'll give you more in-depth understanding so we can see private, static, void. So whenever you're writing this main classes, you need to understand what are these words with these keywords. So these assigned keywords are simply for static. A static attribute is a class attribute. So changing it for one object means it change for all the object of the class. So as we can say from the name, static means is there, is not really dynamic. So by static, we're not able to change it. Once it's there, that's it, stays there. So the static method is a class method. It can be called by using the class name. So whenever we declare a name, we can now use that same one because we have declared it as static. So with final, we looking into constant. So as I mentioned before, we have variables and constant. So when we're working with constant in Java, we use final. And as the definition says, a final variable can be assigned a value once it is initialized. A final method can be overridden, and the final class cannot be subclassed. So the way we saw inheritance, a class which is a subclass cannot work as a final, because if we put final constant, this constant, it cannot be called back by our superclass. And now we have abstract, which I explained before, which allows us to reutilize this function. So an abstract method has a header only, but not a body. And any subclass is supposed to override it. And an abstract class cannot be instantiated. So this is everything for quick introductions of data type, data structures, and methods and object-oriented programming. So this was a quick overview, but we'll go more in depth, analyze each single of them on our next lecture.
Okay.
Yeah. Is there any question?
No, it's a lot to take in.
Okay.
Could you send me, is it possible for you to send me this PowerPoint? Yeah.
Yes, definitely. I will. Okay. Do you have access to Moodle, right?
Sorry?
You have access to Moodle, right?
Moodle. Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Okay, I will send it to you and upload it on Moodle as well.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so I'll see you tomorrow.
Okay, sweet. Is it same time or?
Yeah, same time. We start at 7. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
All right.
Have a good day.
Cheers.